afternoon and welcome to today's Way Forward Workshop Leader Lunch Break, where we are thrilled to welcome Scott Skinner to the conversation. Copywriter, Peace Corps volunteer, nonprofit fundraiser, and ultimately real estate developer, Scott Skinner's career has spanned many sectors and led to the development of many skill sets. All will be tapped in his new role as the first executive director of the North Coast Waterfront Development Corporation. He has the weighty charge of implementing the newly emerging, and let's face it, ever-changing, Lakefront Development Master Plan. He will be tasked with leading advocacy efforts and fundraising strategies, and he's also charged with making sure the efforts are aligned with the vision of the city, county, state, and federal leaders, as well as civic and business community representatives. No small feat. Scott's role is not simply responsible for creating access to our shoreline, for North Coast Development Corporation will be heavily involved in real estate investment and construction in the downtown central business district. Its area of jurisdiction will be north of St. Clair and along the shoreway from shore to core to shore, as you have heard before. A native of San Jose, California, Scott moved to Cleveland in 2018 and accepted a position as project manager at NRP Group. He quickly rose to become vice president of development. He was especially interested in leveraging partnerships across sectors to create dynamic, transit-oriented, mixed-income communities, and you can see his work manifest in our own Slavic Village and other neighborhoods across Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana. You're going to see this play out in his new role. So as Scott said, soon after accepting, I just want the general public to know that the Lakefront will be a place for them. Despite the demands of his work, he finds time to give back with service on the boards of Neighborhood Family Practice in Maydugan, and we are proud to call him a trifecta alum of Cleveland Bridge Builders, Civic Leadership Institute, and our Advanced Leadership Institute. Thank you for joining us, Scott.
Marianne, thank you so much. It's good to see a bunch of friendly faces, including a couple stakeholders of the work that we're doing on the Lakefront, which is great. Marianne, after you described what my job is, I'm second guessing everything here. But no, in all seriousness, appreciate you all taking the time. And folks on the call, I'm going to be relatively brief in my remarks here. I have a couple images to show. Want to make sure to leave the time open for questions and comments and all that. One thing that I'm discovering in this role is that there's no shortage of questions and comments around what should happen on the Lakefront. So Marianne alluded to it, but just by way of background, most folks in Cleveland know me solely through the lens of real estate development, but it's a small part of my broader career so far. Born and raised in the Bay Area, Northern California. Undergrad degree was in journalism, spent a couple years as a sports writer for the website of the San Francisco Chronicle out there covering the 49ers and the Giants. Left that to join the Peace Corps and spent a little over 2 years in the Republic of Georgia in a little village on the Georgian-Russian border doing economic development work, as well as teaching English. Came back, was in DC for a short stint, basically doing corporate fundraising for a nonprofit. Asking for money is sort of a through line of a lot of the careers and jobs that I've had, and will continue with this one as well. And then I went to get an MBA, where I met David Heller, who's the CEO and founder of the NRP Group, based here in Cleveland. And he convinced me to move to Cleveland sight unseen in 2018. And Cleveland's been really, really good to my family and I. My wife, myself, and my young son live in the Ohio City neighborhood, and have been able to be involved in a lot of civic initiatives here as well. Spent the last 6 years developing real estate across the Midwest, running NRP's business in Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana. Specifically projects in Cleveland that folks might know about. The 5115 at the Rising in Slavic Village, which I see Tony Brancatelli on this call, who played an enormous role in that happening. Via Sana as an affordable housing development on the Metro Health campus. Have a development in Glenville with UH as a partner, and then the large project down on the Scranton Peninsula is something I've been working on since I moved here as well. So that's a little bit of my background. I just want to, before we sort of dive into this organization, I'm going to share my screen for a second and just show a couple images here. These are images that, this is just the current sort of status of the lakefront. This is even an old image. The buildings down here are not even present anymore. But you can see north of Brown Stadium, there's a large amount of surface parking lot. And I think one of the things I'm focused on in this job as well is, the sorts of folks who generally are on these calls and involved civically and pay attention to these things all know that there's a large parking space north of the stadium that can be activated and can be improved upon. A lot of sort of regular Clevelanders don't, actually. The opportunity of the lakefront is something that still needs to be communicated and educated with folks here. The images that I'm showing now are created by a group called Field Operations, who is engaged by the city of Cleveland. I should add in Greater Cleveland Partnership played a large role in getting these done as well. And this is a broader vision of what the lakefront can look like. Like any master plan, this is probably not going to look exactly like this at the end of the day. But this is, the guiding principle. This is the vision that we see. You can see it's oriented primarily around public space and access. And you can sort of see the access component of that there. A large part of this plan and what I'm spending my time working on now is slowing down and making some changes to the shoreway, which I can go back to here. As you can see, sort of cuts right through here and speeds through downtown. And eventually this plan envisions much broader and much more pedestrian friendly access from East 9th, from West 3rd, and from the land bridge that everyone has talked about quite a lot as well. Here's just another version of that from a different angle. You can sort of see the opportunity that presents itself both from a public access perspective and from a real estate perspective. And then here's a sort of overhead image too. So that's all I wanted to share. I'm happy to put these up again later in the conversation, but sort of shifting gears to focus on my organization. So the North Coast Waterfront Development Corporation was envisioned by the city of Cleveland and a consulting group called HRNA that sort of focused on the how of how to get this lakefront development sort of vision and master plan done. We sort of with all these images, we end up talking a lot about the what, but the how, in my opinion, is more important. And one of the best practices this group identified nationally is that there needs to be a dedicated organization and several dedicated people who are solely focused on this work. The folks at the city and the BIM administration have been working very hard on this, since he was the mayor-elect. But they're also working hard on a lot of other things, and through no fault of anyone, there hasn't been someone who's really solely focused on the lakefront. So the idea of creating this organization was, I wake up and go to bed, and my entire workday is focused on thinking about how to execute on this master plan. Additionally, it is an independent organization. It's a 501c3. I have a board that I report to that is made up of most of the major stakeholders on the lakefront, as well as the mayor and council president Griffin and a handful of other very important folks. It's an independent 501c3, and part of the purpose of that is this sort of organization can be a little more nimble than the city can in working through trying to advance these initiatives. So this is a big, complicated project, and my sort of vision, or moving forward, my mission is to figure out how to execute on this master plan, on the vision that field operations and that Mayor Bibb's administration has put forward. It's an interesting sort of place to be in, where I'm simultaneously inheriting a very large, very complicated project, and also trying to build a small organization up from scratch. As of right now, I'm the sole employee. You'll see job postings going out in the next 30 to 60 days for areas that I'm going to need some help in. But I am also focused, obviously, on building a team, and moving forward. There are no shortage of stakeholders in this project and in this process and in this work. We'll continue to work closely with the city of Cleveland, with the county, with the state, with the federal government. We are already in the process of applying for large-scale federal grants to help fund some of this work, as well as continue to work forward with both the users that are here currently. They are very, very important Cleveland stakeholders. As well as the general public. And I spent the last, like I mentioned, last 6 years developing housing, both market rate and affordable, all across the city. And despite the fact that I live in Ohio City, I'm now focused on the lakefront. I've also spent a lot of time in neighborhood block clubs in Slavic Village and Glenville and Clark Fulton, and making sure that folks in those communities know that there are opportunities for them to access what is the region's most significant asset, and providing actual ways for them to do that affordably is something that's really important to me as well. So that was a lot. I will stop there. I'm sure there are, if there aren't already in the chat, I'm sure there are questions or specific things that folks would like me to speak to.
Scott, thank you so much. And knowing that a large priority right now is also building the organization, but as you think about the development and the master plan, what are some of the first priorities the organization is going to be tackling?
Sure. So I think one important thing to note before I sort of dive into that first priority, Rachel, is, when you look at a master plan like this, it just seems impossible, right? It seems very difficult to do. What I'm focusing on and what I'm trying to do and how I see master plans like this is in a series of real estate transactions, right? We sort of see in these images, a beautiful lakefront vision, and I see a financeable multifamily project, a hotel, a market, a public park space, and a land bridge, and a number of other things that can be sort of broken apart and worked on in smaller chunks. I keep getting reminded of the phrase, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? Then to Rachel, to your point specifically, the first big part of this project that I'm being tasked with, and not solely me, the city and folks at Osborne Engineering and a large team of people are on looking at access. So looking at the shoreway specifically. The master plan envisions the shoreway looking a little bit differently, and it envisions much more friendly pedestrian access. I've said this a couple times. I have a small child, and right now walking him over in a stroller, or now that he's walking and running on the sidewalk from downtown over the bridge to get to the Rock Hall, feels like a sort of perilous journey sometimes. And that's that's also true of West Third, and creating access for folks to get from downtown to get to the lakefront, to get to the amenities that we have and the amenities that we're going to have, is something that's really important. So Rachel, to answer your question, the first big piece of this is the shoreway piece. Additionally, large funding sources that you're looking for to do a lot of this work from the federal government are often focused on transportation, and that's sort of an element of here as well. Trying to kick off this this first piece. It's also critical to access and building infrastructure for everything north of it too.
Let's talk about access and how you might be thinking about access. That can be access physically, but also thinking about the different populations in our community, and how do you ensure this is truly an equitable, accessible development?
Yeah, so there's a bunch there, right? In just those few words, I think in terms of just pure access, right? I think we're in conversations with Amtrak and RTA to look at the public transit opportunities and what those can look like moving forward for folks to enjoy the amenities here. And then I've mentioned it a couple times, but when we talk about reimagining the shoreway, we think about things like bike lanes and sidewalks, and not just that, but the cross points as well. And I think the land bridge connecting folks from the mall, from Public Square, from areas where there are opportunities to park downtown, and being able to walk to the lakefront is a huge component of this access. In terms of equity, it's I think about it in a couple ways. One, right now, one of the challenges in folks accessing the lakefront is that almost everything down there is super expensive, right? You think like going to a Browns game is worth it, but it's an expensive ticket. The Great Lakes Science Center has an entrance fee. Parking to get to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame can be expensive, and there aren't a lot of options for folks to go down there. Voinovich Park is great, but there aren't a lot of options for folks to go down there and engage in public space free of charge. Voinovich Park is only so big. So when I think of access, I also think of in this master plan that we're looking at, almost a little over 60% of it, almost 70% of it is dedicated to public space that is meant to be free to the general population. And I hope that it improves the equity component of that. Additionally, it's a harder challenge ensuring that folks in Greater Cleveland and the region feel a sense of ownership of this, and like this is a place for them. I have memories of being in a neighborhood block club on the east side, and trying to talk about amenities that existed for that neighborhood in University Circle, and a lot of folks responding with that's not really ours, like that doesn't belong to us as well. And I think combating sort of that general feeling and that lack of sense of ownership is something that's going to be really important moving forward as well. And just a shout out, I know GCP and the city have done some tremendous community engagement so far. I think there were 5,000 surveys that were filled out on what should happen down there, and I think that continued community access will be important. Conversation will be an important part of that.
So there are two potentially hot button areas that are going to potentially be covered by your master plan. You've got the stadium.
Only two?
Well, the chat wants to focus on two right now. So
I think I can guess.
Stadium and Burke. How
Sure.
do those two entities and all of the thoughts and the conversations and what could happen play into this master plan?
Sure. So I can say right now, Burke is not included in the master plan for this vision, for those images that I showed you. However, it is something that is top of mind for me and for the administration moving forward. The mayor talked a lot on in his campaign about Burke and about things that can happen there. I know the city is working through several different studies to understand the economic impact that Burke currently offers and how that could change if Burke changed. But it is not included in this specific master plan. However, it is something that we are keeping in mind as we look at all of this. Because for me personally, when you think about access for communities that are not solely downtown, Burke goes fairly far to the east side, and there's an opportunity to think about that critically there. However, there are no immediate plans that are a part of my work. And then the stadium, the Haslam Group has been working in good faith with the city of Cleveland, has been working really diligently, and has been very communicative in their conversations with the stadium. The CEO of the Haslam Group, Dave Jenkins, is on my board, and they've also been very helpful in thinking about ways to activate that space north of the stadium in the near term through temporary programming events, things like that as well. I know the Haslam Group and the city and myself are in very consistent communication, and they are working towards a business decision for what makes the most sense for them and for the region and the community. But I wouldn't have accepted this position if I thought that its success relied solely on the brown stain down to the lakefront. Do I hope they do? Yes, absolutely. I think it creates a lot of really interesting opportunities. However, the broader vision of improving access to Cleveland's greatest asset and using public infrastructure and public amenities to spur private investment, that doesn't really change. That's at least how I'm thinking about it. And going back to Rachel, the piece that we're working on first, the shoreway component, that is something that we have control over. And something that we want to see regardless. So that's sort of how I'm thinking about it. I am 100% sure that was not a satisfying answer for most folks on this call, but that's the best that I can do for right now.
As you think about this development, how are you planning to make sure that it connects and with other developments such as the downtown connector linking Slavic Village to downtown?
Yeah, no, it's a big piece of this, and I think the infrastructure there has been being worked on for years. The Lakefront trail connecting to the towpath, connecting through every other trail system that exists in the region has really already been laid. And I think as you look at the master plan, it's really improving access for bikes specifically, as well as for pedestrians. And I think even expanding that to make sure that if you're biking down the lake, you can stay on the lake is something that's important moving forward. I think that the trail network is one of Cleveland and the region's most prized accomplishments, and something that the region as a whole should be really proud of. And that'll play a big role as we think about getting folks down to the lakefront. And on top of that, it drives private investment. I think that's something that's not sort of talked about enough. A lot of my role here, when you look at all the buildings you see in this master plan north of the stadium, those are not buildings like that I or the city of Cleveland are going to finance themselves, right? These are going to be public-private real estate transactions, in which the city and my organization will be heavily involved, and we'll work to make sure they are consistent with the master plan. But we are going to be bring in multifamily developers and owners and hotel users. And when I put my development hat on, and you look at a couple of the projects that NRP has done over the last 10 years, the Edison at Gordon Square doesn't really happen without the Lakefront Trail going through it and Edgewater Beach getting developed down there. The Scranton Peninsula doesn't really happen without the towpath providing a lot of access, as well as the Red Line Greenway, as well as Irishtown Bend was making significant progress there as well. And how part of how I'm thinking about that trail network, Rachel, is both in terms of access and actually getting folks down there, as well as using it to spur additional private investment for what we want to see down there.
In addition to government and a few of the partners you've already mentioned, who are some of your additional key partners that you will be building those relationships with as you move forward?
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned a couple of the folks, the Browns, the Rock Hall, the Great Lakes Science Center, the Port Authority are all really important existing partners. Downtown Cleveland Inc. is a really important existing partner here as we think about connecting downtown to here. Obviously, the city and the county and all the different departments therein will be important partners moving forward. At the state level, the Ohio Department of Transportation is an incredibly important partner as we put together the shoreway work. At the federal level, the Department of Transportation as well, and then all of our elected representatives who represent this area and the region, around it. This development will not solely benefit people who live within a quarter mile of it. So thinking about elected representatives in the Northeast Ohio State House and Senate delegation, was in City Hall just last week with myself and a few others to talk about this project. Our congressional reps who serve this region, specifically Congresswoman Brown, Congressman Joyce, Congressman Miller, will be really important stakeholders here and really important partners in moving forward as well. And then, I know at the state level, this is something the DeWine administration is really interested in seeing happen. And there's been a lot of conversations about this work at the federal level just already.
You mentioned so many different constituencies in that list of key partners, let alone those who are interested in this work. How do you work to balance and be responsive to the needs and the perspectives of all those different constituencies? And what challenges do you face in that?
That's a very, very good and very, very complicated question. I think, with those you're right, there's a lot of constituencies. And then I keep saying above and beyond direct stakeholders, there's 2 million people in Northeast Ohio and 6 million opinions of how this should work going down there. Balancing that is important. I think I am a big believer in not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think with any master plan, with any vision, with any development of any sort, not everyone is going to be 100% happy with the outcome or with the plan at all. So how I think about balancing that is, making sure everyone at the very least feels heard and is heard as we're working through this. And then at the same time, using the best information you can and working with the best partners that you have, identifying and being clear about what the vision is for something like this. And then, while having a little bit of flexibility to understand that public spaces can look slightly different, the market might change, sort of being unwavering in what this vision is. So at the very least, at the end of the day, the general public, the community can say, we knew, we were aware of what the vision was for the lakefront. We had access to attend community meetings. We had access to provide input. And then once that input was taken in and, decisions were made through all of that community input, and I can point to probably 20 things in the master plan that are direct results of comments received at the end of the day, just to be clear with what the vision is and open and transparent. Building affordable housing for the last 6 years, I'm very used to telling folks, the truth, and sometimes that's truth that folks don't want to hear.
Can you speak to a bit more around the fundings, kind of your initial funding sources, and what is that additional funding that's going to be needed for the work to move forward?
Yeah, so I mean, the first one was something that passed just a couple of weeks ago. The city's TIF district is a huge and important part of being able to move forward with this. We are working with the State House and State Senate to secure funding for the land bridge specifically, or for parts of the land bridge specifically, to move forward. And then we are working with the Department of Transportation to secure several large-scale grants and loans that will be able to fund a lot of the infrastructure work here. That's as much as I can say and talk about right now. But in the next 2 to 3 months, folks should look out for just announcements of progress being made and work being done.
Has the port and other entities sorted out the submerged and other land leases that complicate reuse issues?
So without getting super in the weeds and boring everyone but me and the person who asked that question, I will. So it is something that is being worked out. It is a complicated issue. Just to give sort of the super high level overview for everyone, the coastline of Ohio used to end basically where the shoreway is. So everything north of that is essentially man-made fill. And there's a complicated submerged land lease structure that requires users of that land to have land leases with both the state, who owns the sort of bedrock underneath, as well as the city, who owns the fill on top. So it is something being worked out. That's the most I want to get into that before I start to see eyes glazing over here.
So there's obviously a lot of excitement and expectations that come with waterfront development in our community. How do you anticipate managing kind of the realities of the timeline and what progress is going to look like versus some of those expectations of wanting to see quicker progress?
Yeah, that is something that keeps me up at night significantly. I think, best case scenario, a lot of this is 3 to 5 years away, and that's best case. So I think sort of recognizing that, keeping that North Star of what you want this to look and be like at the end of the day, being communicative openly about progress that is being made, and sort of setting benchmarks and then communicating to the general public when those benchmarks are being hit is really important in that capacity. And then, we're also looking at, I mentioned earlier, how we can activate some of that space sort of in the interim, right? There is a large parking lot that is, used for Browns games and not a lot else north of the stadium. So what can we do? How can we form, working groups to think creatively about programs that can exist north of the stadium to activate that space, to sort of reorient how the general public thinks about the space north of the stadium, and to get folks down to the water.
And for those who are interested in staying informed, what are some of the methods that you plan to use to share progress and keep us updated?
Yeah, so there is a website on here that sort of shows history and some progress thus far. Later this summer, we will be sort of working through the next big round of community engagement. And then I know, the city and a couple of stakeholders have continued to do sort of smaller scale ward meetings in different areas of the community. But I think, later this summer, folks will start to see and hear more about progress that has been made and is continuing to be made.
Many times when there's a new project in Cleveland, it's often referenced in relation to something in another city, like the High Line. But we have so many unique things here, and the waterfront is such a unique space for us. Is there a component of this development that you are excited to show off to the world?
That is a really good question, actually. I do. There's a couple things there. So one, I think there's a balance, right? Like, Cleveland is a unique place, and we want to do something that is for and of Cleveland and the region. There are lessons to be learned from other cities who have done these things well. My organization was created because it's identified as a best practice in a lot of other cities, including Seattle and Cincinnati and a handful of others. But to answer your question specifically, I am personally excited about two sort of points of access. One is the land bridge. I think it's a really interesting exercise. I think, I think regardless of the Haslam's ultimate decision, you are connecting the mall and public square and the convention center and a lot of hotels directly to the lakefront and directly to amenities that are down there. And I think that's going to be important regardless. And then I mentioned earlier, but the sort of creating a more pedestrian friendly and a more interesting and impactful connection at East 9th to get down to the Rock Hall, to get out to Voinovich Park, to get out to the wharf down there. I think are both really exciting opportunities. I know like roads and bridges aren't always like the sexiest parts of projects, but it does fundamentally change how you experience what's down there. And it also expands the radius of, you know, if you're driving, where you can park and still access the lakefront. And if you're not, gets you directed down there.
Right, Scott, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so very much, first, for taking on this challenge. I can't think of anyone better to move this forward. We look forward to seeing what's going to unfold at the lakefront. So thank you for all that you are doing.